All right, let's explore these passages together. A bit of context. Up until this point, okay, Jesus has been traveling around preaching and healing and enjoying popularity, but he's also aroused the anger of the authorities, okay? And everyone's asking, who is this man? And because of these mutterings, Jesus and his disciples have conversations. That's kind of what's going on. Now, just before this passage, Jesus asks his disciples, who do you say I am? And Peter says, next slide, you're the Messiah, the Son of the living God. Okay, this is just before our passage. And this marks a turning point in their understanding of who Jesus is. He's no longer just a rabbi. He's no longer just a teacher or possibly the one who's going to come. They now know that Jesus is the Messiah. They now know that Jesus is the Son of God. And Jesus tells them to keep that to themselves. And then he lets them in on a big secret. Jesus begins to prepare them for the fact, and this is the secret, that as a Messiah, he has to go to Jerusalem to die. Okay? And so will they. If not physically, then at least metaphorically. He's saying, I'm the Messiah. And they're like, jolly good, but I'm going to die. And so are you. And of course, Peter doesn't like this. I mean, if you were there, you wouldn't like that one bit. And that brings us to our passage 6 days after these explosive words. Jesus takes, we read it, Peter, James, and John up a mountain, not just any mountain. In the corresponding account in Matthew 17, we're told it was a high mountain. So after these explosive words, he takes those three up a high mountain. Now, which mountain could it have been? It might have been this one, Mount Tabor in southern Galilee. And that's the traditional view. So if you're into church history, this is where most Christians throughout history think they went. But Mount Tabor, we also have found out more recently, had a great big Roman fortress on top of it. So it would have been difficult to find a private spot. And secondly, it was also far away from Caesarea Philippi, where we know from the scriptures they kind of were. So actually, it probably wasn't this place, which is a little bit awkward because they built a church called Church of the Transfiguration on top of it. But it probably wasn't there. It's a bit inconvenient. Okay, so probably the church of the probably, not the Transfiguration. Okay, another theory, next slide, is that it was Mount Hermon. Look at that, it's beautiful. Which is just 14 miles from Caesarea. So it is more likely in terms of position where this happened. But you see, Mount Hermon is not just high, it's a very high mountain, 9,400 feet. So if they were there, try and imagine it, if they were there, they would have been knee-deep in snow. Okay, and it says that they met a crowd on the way down. And so it's quite unlikely that they would have found a bunch of scribes halfway up a snowy mountain. Yeah? Probably not that one. Number 3, another theory is that it could have been Mount Myron. There we go. Mount Myron is in Galilee, so again, it makes sense journey-wise. And it was a holy place for the Jews, so very likely that you'd find some scribes hanging out kind of there. But the problem is, it's not very high. So which mountain was it, if you were to hazard a guess? Well, when I was studying at Trinity, and there I am there was a theologian, I'm the one in the middle. There was a theologian called John Nolland, and if you read theology, you know he's pretty heavy duty. He wrote many of the word commentary series on Luke and Matthew. He's one of the world's leading scholars in New Testament theology. So if I'm going to ask anyone, I'm going to ask John Nolland. I asked him, John, which mountain do you think it was? And do you know what he said? He said, Mark, I don't know. It doesn't really matter, but the important thing is that it was a mountain. You see, the important thing is that they went up. When you go up any mountain, you see things differently. When you get up there, what you see is awesome, it's special, there's a wow factor. That's what is significant about going up a mountain. Jesus took his disciples somewhere different, away from the hustle and bustle and clamor of everyday life, so they could look down and see things with a new perspective. Jesus knew that his disciples needed time away from the normalities of life, and so it is with us. Here is an invitation, even this morning, to go up a mountain with God, to draw up into his presence, and then look at your life, the things you're struggling with new perspective, with new reorientation. I love this quote from Leonardo da Vinci. I think I have it up there. He said, "Every now and then, go away, have a little relaxation, for when you come back to your work, your judgment will be surer. Go some distance away because the work appears smaller and more of it can be taken in at a glance, and a lack of harmony or proportion is more readily seen." You see, Jesus took his friends up a high mountain to help them gain some perspective on who he is, or who he was, and who they were. Okay, let's carry on. Verse 29, up the mountain they go, and suddenly we heard Jesus' clothes become whiter than white and his face shines. And there's much debate about what happened here. So what's going on? Well, some would say it was Jesus' glory, okay, his divinity, his godness, which is shining through, and it's been hidden by his humanity. But I want to challenge that thought. Because if it was only the divine bit shining through, how come Luke's gospel also says that Moses and Elijah were shining as well? Because they weren't divine like Jesus is. So perhaps then it wasn't the God bit of Jesus shining through, but it was the humanity of Jesus itself, okay, his humanity, but shining with divine glory. Let me say that again. It was his humanity, and that's how he kind of interfaces with us and identifies with us. It's his humanity, but shining with divine glory. And Jesus has already told his followers at the end of time, all who follow him will be shiny, right? He says, then the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father, which ties in with Daniel's prophecy in the Old Testament, which says, those who are wise shall shine like the brightness of the sky, and those who lead many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. So it would seem, therefore, that God has always intended humanity, that's you and me, to shine, to be glorious. We're meant to be shiny, happy people. No one, you like R.E.M.? Hey, people going down. Exactly. Anyway, thank you for that musical interlude. Suddenly, Moses and Elijah turn up, and they're shining too. I want you to catch this. The presence of Moses and Elijah is significant. Moses represents what? He represents the law. Okay? And of course, our Old Testament reading that Chris read reminded us, didn't it, of when Moses received the law. Okay? Moses represents the law. Elijah represents the prophets. Yeah? I want you to get a full picture of this scripture. So Jesus is the fulfillment of the law and the prophets. Can you see what's going on here? He is revealing the gloriousness of who he is to his followers, to his disciples, to you and me. He says, do not think I came to abolish the law and the prophets. Rather, I have come to fulfill them. That's from Matthew 5. And this is really special. And all of this stuff we've just looked at together freaked Peter out. Remember I said at the beginning, up until this point, Peter's been upset that Jesus has been talking about dying. Okay, it doesn't fit with his picture of the Messiah. Okay, God forbid it, Lord, right? He doesn't like it. In fact, Jesus says to him later, get behind me, Satan, okay? But now, see the switch in Peter's feelings. Now here is Jesus shining in glory. Peter must be thinking, this is more like it. This is what the Messiah should be like. None of that dying stuff, right? This is glorious. And he blurts out in verse 33 on the screen, Master, great, it's good for us to be here on this mountain. Let us make 3 dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, because he's here too, one for Elijah. And it says this, not knowing what he said. Now, why did Peter say these words? Why did he want to build some tents all of a sudden? Well, he was probably thinking back to when the Israelites lived in the wilderness. Do you remember that in the Old Testament? And God lived, or his presence was in the tents. He's thinking, aha, tents are heavenly dwellings. And if we have 3 tents, one for each of you, we might prolong this heavenly experience. And then maybe you'll shut up about dying. All right. Have you ever gone to those festivals, Christian festivals, where you have tents? It's quite beautiful symbolism, but sometimes we just don't want to leave there. Like, oh, it's awesome here at this conference. I don't want to go, right? So Peter wants to prolong this amazing, glorious spiritual experience. But notice it says, while he was saying this, okay, this is quite significant. This is about one of the only times in Scripture that God interrupts somebody. How embarrassing. I'd be so gutted if I was about to say something and God interrupted me in front of my friends. But that's what's going on here. Okay, it says, while he was still speaking, a bright cloud came and overshadowed them. And I kind of feel for Peter here. He's basically being shut up by God at this moment. Because there are times when we are having an amazing experience, a mountaintop experience, and we wish it could stay like that forever. And rather than enjoying something for a season and then moving on to what God has for us, we keep going back and trying to relive it. Does anyone identify with me here? Peter doesn't want to move on. He wants to pitch his tent and have everyone stay right there. But here's the point. We can't live in these times forever. We can't afford to stay still. We can't allow fear to hold us back. And I want to ask you this question. What is your equivalent of Peter's tent? What is it that makes you say, oh, I want to be here, I don't want to move on. I want to stay here forever? What is it that tempts you to crawl in and stay in that lovely place and not join Jesus in his walk to Jerusalem and the cross? What's your tent? Kai and I have just, for better or for worse, got a puppy. And puppy's happy place is this crate. You know, if you're a dog owner, you make it like the funnest place ever. But now sometimes I need to take him down out of the mountain, so to speak, to go have a wee. But he doesn't want to do it. His crate is his happy space. And I know he needs to go have a wee, because if he does it in his crate, he ain't going to be happy. What is that place where you just want to stay and you don't want to move on? You know, in our Exodus passage, Moses climbed the mountain. The glory of the Lord came down all around him. He stayed there for 40 days and for 40 nights. But then what? He didn't stay. He came back down. His perspective changed. He came down the mountain. What mountain is the Lord asking for you to come down on, to trust him, for him to lead you? Now hear me. There is a right sense of valuing what has passed, absolutely. But when that keeps us in the past, when it holds us back, particularly born out of fear, that's when we need to allow the Lord to commission us for a journey ahead. And that's exactly what happens at the end of the story. Let me show you. It says, then from the cloud came a voice and said, this is my son, my chosen, listen to him. In Matthew, it actually says, this is my son, whom I love, my beloved, whom I'm well pleased. And you might recognize these words from an earlier scene, because they were also said, where? At Jesus' baptism, at his baptism. And here comes that voice again. Jesus has turned, he's in glory, to face Jerusalem and all that awaits him there. And remember, what awaits Jerusalem there? Ultimately, it's death and suffering. And for some of us, as we look out for our next steps, we may be looking at difficult times. We may need to come to terms with death, with difficulties. And Jesus knew and knows what that is like. And yet he turns to face it. The 40 days, 40 nights, empowered by the Spirit and the love of God, commissioned, this is my beloved. If you feel yourself turning, looking down a difficult path, know that God says, you, my beloved. He commissions you. He's with you every step of the way. This is my beloved Son, whom I'm well pleased. And this is a key moment in Jesus' walk to the cross. And of course, we've entered Lent, haven't we? Where we think about these things. And he gets his Father's affirmation for the next stage. I wonder if you're needing to hear God's affirmation at the start of this year as we approach the season of Lent. Perhaps you need to be reminded that you too are God's beloved child. He's with you wherever you go. This might be something to think about and pray about this week. Or maybe you need to take a break, as we heard, and go to a high place to gain perspective, to spend time with God. Lorna is here almost every week doing our sound, but I love the fact, Lorna, that you have no hesitation in going away to your caravan, do you? Or going for a retreat, because you know it, yeah. And you tell me about it, I get jealous and go, maybe I should go as well. But maybe you need to think about, I've been so stuck in my situation. Maybe I need to ask the Lord to take me up a high mountain, to spend time with him. And finally, there's no need to be afraid. At the very end of the account of Matthew's account, it says this in verse 7. It says, Jesus came and touched them, saying, get up, do not be afraid. When they looked up, they saw no one except Jesus. This morning, as we continue to worship, maybe all you want is a touch from Jesus. You just need to know that you're his beloved. You just need to feel him close with you. So let's pray.